Hello, I am Peter Okwocha. Welcome to Focus on Africa, our top stories. President Macron of France holds a Sahel Summit with West African leaders to clarify France's military role in a region hit by jihadist violence. Another al-Shabaab attack by militants in Kenya leaves 3 dead in the latest escalation of violence.
These guys are declaring war. Let them know that we have also declared war on our side.
Latest moves get underway in Washington to break the deadlock between Ethiopia and Egypt over the building of a huge dam on the River Nile. Also on the program, progress on Libya talks in Moscow. Russia and Turkey push for a Libya truce despite backing rival factions. And in sports, the Ghana Football Association is investigating a violent incident which left 1 fan with gunshot wounds after a local league game. Thanks for joining us here on Focus in Africa from BBC World News. The French President Emmanuel Macron is hosting heads of states from West Africa today in the southern French city of Pau. Their aim is to map out a new strategy to fight insurgent violence in the Sahel region. It comes amidst a spate of deadly attacks by militants across the area, as well as questions about the presence of French troops there. The BBC's Lamine Konkobo reports from Paris.
In the sleepy town of Pau, better known for tourism than security issues, French President Emmanuel Macron and leaders from the Sahel regions are meeting. Their aim is to come up with a strategy they hope will put an end to the war against Islamist militancy that's lasted for almost a decade. Before the talks began, a moment was taken to remember those who died. The proceedings are taking place in this building, the Château de Pau, a historic building that used to be the lodging of a local king, Henry IV. It is going to be a long day for Emmanuel Macron and the G5 leaders. 3 hours of discussions, and thereafter Emmanuel Macron will come and address the press with the outcome. Finding a solution won't be an easy task, as over the last year the conflict worsened with attacks on army positions and civilians becoming more common. Last week, 89 soldiers from Niger were killed, and France has also suffered significant casualties. The 13 French soldiers who died in a helicopter crash in Mali were from the 5th Combat Regiment headquartered here in Pau. The disastrous effects of the conflict can be measured in the over 4 million people who are displaced in the Sahel. While some believe an increased military presence is the only solution to restore peace in the region, others feel the ex-colonial power's presence adds fuel to the fire. Lamine Konkobo, Pau, BBC News.
Well, let's get more on this summit now. Lamine, who you just heard from there, joins us from Pau in France, and our West Africa correspondent, Louise Dewast, is in Dakar. Let's start with you, Lamine. What exactly are these leaders hoping to achieve at this meeting?
I think that they're hoping to get more understanding between themselves about what is the road ahead. Emmanuel Macron wants the G5 leaders to clearly say that the presence of the French forces in the Sahel is on their demand, and that it is not a presence that should be viewed as an occupation force. Some critics in the area, activists mainly, are saying that the French military there is serving neo-colonial needs, and Emmanuel Macron is rankled by all these accusations. So he wants a clear statement. He wants those leaders to take responsibility for the presence of the troops in this country.
Okay, and Louise in Dakar, as we heard from Lamine in his report, that there's been such a deterioration of security in the Sahel. Why have things gone so bad now?
Well, Peter, armed groups in the Sahel region have been profiting from a number of things. They've been profiting from porous borders in the areas in which they operate in. They've been profiting from little state presence also in those areas. They've also been profiting from illicit activities, so drug trafficking, human trafficking, weapons trafficking, that enable to fund some of their operations. But it's not just about armed groups. soldiers in the region have also been accused of unlawful killings, and that, some people believe, is driving some towards armed groups. There's also, finally, the issue of militias. A number of militias have emerged in Mali and Burkina Faso, and often these militias build on long-standing tensions between different ethnic communities, between herders and pastoralists. So all of these perspectives, all of these factors need to be considered when looking into insecurity in the region.
So there are a myriad of groups operating in the region there, Louise. But why is the French presence, I mean, they say they're there to help. Why is it so divisive?
Well, you know, the French are now one of the main military actors in the region, and so they have a responsibility in the current situation. But definitely a number of observers of NGOs are saying that the military response overall is part of the problem. Just to give you one example, in Mali last year, 80,000 people were displaced due to military operations. And so what's clear today is that a military response only, whether it's French or regional or both, that response is not enough to resolve the crisis, and that a political response from the leaders of the G5 Sahel countries is also needed.
And Lamine, a lot of people will be, looking at this summit today and wondering, well, what can these leaders, the 5 West African leaders who are there with President Macron, what can they achieve in a few hours that they haven't achieved in the last couple of years? I mean, Mr. Macron has met with some of these leaders in the past couple of months.
I mean, I think that they are here, as the president said, to redefine the strategy overall, because, of course, with the ongoing killings, it can be said without doubt that the strategy hasn't worked well so far. But more importantly, I think that what they will be seeking to is the involvement of more foreign powers. They want it to be more than just an issue for France to deal with here. That's why, of course, Emmanuel Macron has widened the guest list to include the head of the European Council, Charles Michel, who is attending. He has also invited the chairman of the African Union's Commission, Moussa Faki, to attend. So there is an attempt here, of course, to get this clear articulation of what the presence means, but also they want to redefine the strategy and get more international support for the military campaign in the Sahel.
Okay, Lamine Konkobo there in Pau in southern France, and Louise Dewast speaking to us from Dakar. Thank you both very much. Thank you. Now, police in Kenya are pursuing al-Shabaab militants who have struck in the country yet again, this time killing 3 teachers and abducting 1 in Garissa County. The jihadist group has now carried out 6 attacks in the last 5 weeks, killing more than 25. The BBC's Ferdinand Omondi reports from Kenya's capital, Nairobi.
It was a dawn attack targeted at the teachers' quarters of a local primary school. According to a survivor, the attackers began shooting in the direction before setting on killing non-Muslim male teachers.
All of a sudden, we had one who talked in Kiswahili. He said, "Hakikisha hapo hakuna mtu ako uhai." Then they came to this house, the men's house. Then they killed them.
By the time they left, 3 teachers were dead. Schools in the area have now been closed amid safety concerns for non-Muslim teachers.
Of course, there are plans of removing non-local teachers from areas which are hotspots, that is, especially along the Kenya-Somalia border. So it's unfortunate. It is going to affect education. The way the situation is, the schools cannot operate. It is closed until further notice.
An attempt was also made on this police post near the school, but no casualties were reported.
These guys are declaring war. Let them know that we have also declared war on our side. And we'll go for them wherever they are hiding. And I can assure you, and it has started today, we have officers on the ground. And the instruction is that they should bring those guys either dead or alive.
There also appears to be a new military strategy by al-Shabaab. The group also targeted a telecommunications mast, which has been a recurring feature of the incursions inside Kenyan territory so far this year. Al-Shabaab is increasing its offensive inside Kenya. This latest attack is the 6th in just over a month of violence. Ferdinand Omondi, BBC News, Nairobi.
Let's take a quick look now at other stories making the headlines across Africa and the rest of the world. The trial of Lamine Jack, the former head of World Athletics, has been delayed until June after the emergence of new documents concerning his son's testimony. Senegal has refused to extradite the son to join his father in the dock in Paris on charges of corruption and money laundering. Meanwhile, Jack Sr.'s request that the courts grant him permission to travel to Senegal has been denied. Here in the UK, Queen Elizabeth has released a statement saying there would be a period of transition with Harry and Meghan, who have said they want to be financially independent and step back as senior royals living in Canada and the UK. Meanwhile, the Dukes of Cambridge and Sussex have both denied a newspaper report that their relationship has soured over the past 2 years. On a visit to Zimbabwe, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi has said Western sanctions imposed on Harare were not justified. He met Zimbabwe President Emmerson Mnangagwa and discussed the progress of Chinese-funded projects in Zimbabwe. Mr. Wang was on the last leg of a 5-nation tour. Ministers from Ethiopia, Egypt and Sudan are meeting today in Washington, D.C. for crunch talks over the future of Africa's biggest hydropower dam, which Egypt says will deprive it of water it needs to survive. Talks moved to the U.S. after 4 previous rounds of meetings ended with no solution over the impasse to the construction of the $4 billion Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. As the BBC's Emmanuel Egunza reports, it's been a source of tension since Ethiopia started the project in 2011.
The world's longest river is at the center of a long and winding diplomatic route that some fear could erupt into a full-blown war among countries that share its waters. Egypt, Ethiopia and Sudan have been locked in a dispute since the construction of the Grand Renaissance Dam began in Ethiopia in 2011. Egypt relies on the Nile for about 90% of its irrigation and drinking water and fears the dam could lead to severe water and food insecurity. Ethiopia, on the other hand, sees the mega dam as being crucial for its economic development. 4 previous rounds of talks have ended in deadlock, with each side blaming the other.
Egypt came up with a new proposal and schedule suggesting that the dam be filled within 12 to 21 years. This is not acceptable in any circumstances. We do not accept it.
So how do these countries break this deadlock? The key lies with this agreement that Egypt, Ethiopia and Sudan signed in 2015. This clause in particular sets out the modalities of appointing a 4th-party mediator should the talks this week end with no concrete agreement. Despite the disagreements, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is confident that a deal will be reached this week and allayed any fears of going to war with Ethiopia.
شوف احنا يعني مصر دي خدت خط ثابت فيما يخص.
We plan to reach an agreement by the 15th of January. Otherwise, we will continue with negotiations with the half of the 4th party that can facilitate the issue. You asked me about the remarks of our friend and brother in Ethiopia, Prime Minister Abiy, who said he would assemble 1 million soldiers to protect the dam. We don't need to do so with each other.
The US and the World Bank have played a key role in bringing the 3 countries back to the negotiating table. Here you can see US President Donald Trump with representatives of the countries. Analysts believe compromise is important in settling the dispute.
If both parties, for instance, can come to some compromise and meet each other halfway, there's going to be progress. Failure to do that, I think, is going to be increasingly difficult, especially for Ethiopia to accept, given the amount of resources they've invested in building the dam.
This week's meeting is not only important in deciding the future of Africa's biggest power dam, it will no doubt shape how other countries that share the Nile waters can benefit from this powerful resource. Emmanuel Egunza, BBC News, Nairobi.
And it's just worth mentioning that if the ministers still can't agree on a way forward by Wednesday, then another mediator will be requested, with Ethiopia suggesting South African President Cyril Ramaphosa to help with the negotiations. Now, this is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. With me, Peter Okwocha. Is still to come. South Africa's first black captain, Siya Kolisi, speaks about building a new rugby field. Mimi will have the details. I'm Peter Okwocha. The top stories this hour. President Macron of France is holding a Sahel Summit with West African leaders to clarify France's military role in the region hit by jihadist violence. And 3 teachers were killed in Kenya near the border with Somalia in the latest escalation of attacks by al-Shabaab in the region. Now, there's been some progress in talks to find a solution to ongoing conflict in Libya. That's according to the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. The leaders of Libya's warring parties are in Moscow to try and consolidate a truce brokered by Russia and Turkey. Well, let's get more now on this with BBC Russia reporter Olga Ivshina. Olga, what is this progress that we're hearing about that has been made during these talks?
Well, first of all, these were really, really hard negotiations, and there was a moment when everyone was thinking that's a failure, the agreement won't be signed, there would be no progress, but eventually, as Russian Foreign Minister stated, all sides signed the agreement except for General Haftar. And that's interesting, but even General Haftar didn't reject the agreement. He said he needs more time to think, he has taken pause. And maybe he just needs more guarantees from Moscow. We don't know the details, but many analytics say that it's already progress that those sides are talking, and the possibility of Haftar signing the truce on the agreement on certain the deal on with certain peculiarities is quite high.
And of course, very surprising given the fact that up until Saturday, they were still technically at war. Now, what some people will find strange is the fact that Turkey and Russia, who support different factions in this conflict, are actually brokering these talks together.
It's surprising on the one side, but on the other side, there is for Moscow and for Ankara, there is no surprise. That's exactly what they were trying to achieve, and we saw that experience first being tested in Syria, because Russia and Turkey were supporting different sides, and eventually they were actually brokering the truce, and that experience was quite successful for both sides, and that's why there is no surprise they're doing that again, and that's exactly the role Russia tries to follow in the Middle East, a role of a powerful broker, a role of a mediator which can bring all the different sides together and make things done.
So General Khalifa Haftar has now asked for more time to go through these terms. Do we know when these talks will be concluded? Do we know when he'll come back, and if he's going to sign, when?
Well, it's hard to say, but we know that he's still in Moscow, and that's I guess it's just it's a diplomatic way of saying I need more guarantees. We need to discuss some details of that truce, because otherwise I guess the language would be quite different. So we shouldn't be extremely hopeful, but what is happening is definitely a significant change, and it can be a change for the better for people on the ground, for civilians, for whom there is a chance that war will stop.
And just very briefly, Olga, what do both Russia and Turkey hope to get out of peace in Libya?
Well, for them, it's part, as far as I understand, it's part of a bigger geopolitical game. They want to reestablish themselves as powerful players in the Middle East, but also broadly. And they're also deciding, more general things for themselves in their negotiations with other countries who are active in the region, including, for example, the United States, because both Ankara and Moscow have their own deals and their own thoughts regarding Washington.
Olga, always great to get your insight into this story. Thank you very much. Thank you. You're watching BBC Focus on Africa. It's now time for some sports. Mimi, what have you got for us today?
Some violence in Ghana in terms of football. Ghanaian police have suspended one of its officers pending an investigation into violence at a football game on Sunday, which left one fan with an injury from a rubber bullet. The country's Football Association has also condemned the incident and launched its own inquest into the episode at a match between Asante Kotoko and Beracom Chelsea in Kumasi. BBC's Thomas Nadi in Accra with more.
According to eyewitnesses, the incident occurred when some supporters attempted to assault the referee following the sending off of a Kotoko player. The police responded by firing warning shots to disperse them, injuring a fan in the process. Videos of the incidents were shared widely on social media and showed a man lying on the ground and covered in blood. The Ghana Football Association has issued a statement condemning the violence and warned of sanctions for anyone involved. The episode has raised serious concerns about security at the country's stadia at a time the Ghana FA is trying to rekindle fans' passion for football.
I hope it can be the start of another memorable year. Those are the words of Kenya's women's marathon world record holder, Bridget Kosgei. She's announced that she will be joining her fellow compatriot, Eliud Kipchoge, as they aim to defend their London marathon titles in April. 25-year-old Kosgei, who set her world record in Chicago last October, will have her fair share of competitors with the likes of 2018 winner Vivian Cheriot and current world champion Ruth Chepngetich, to name a few, all taking part. To rugby, Sia Kolisi, South Africa's first black captain, and led his country to win the Rugby World Cup last November against England. Kolisi is now using his platform to give back to his country with the start of a new rugby field for children to play on. He believes his work off the pitch is becoming as important as his work on it. He's been speaking to the BBC's Nestor McGregor.
I know what it feels like to not have proper rugby fields, and facilities. So my goal is to make sure that one day everybody has a fair opportunity and all the schools get to play against each other, like kids from the privileged disadvantage can now compete against a guy that's playing in the suburbs. So now we go and meet businessmen, and I made this shoe with Freedom Movement, which is a brand in South Africa. It's called the Kolisi Fairly. It's green, and we collaborated together, and some of the profits go to the field. So now we're building our first field next week, Monday, actually, in Paul, in Bekwini, and then the next one is going to be my school, where I started playing rugby for the first time.
That's all the sport, Peter.
Many thanks, Mimi. Always appreciated. Finally, the Ethiopian leader Abiy Ahmed has responded to comments made by Donald Trump at a recent rally. The US president complained about a leader of a country who had received the prestigious Nobel Peace Prize instead of him. He's thought to have been referencing Ethiopia. First, here's what Mr. Trump had to say at the rally in Ohio.
I made a deal. I saved a country. And I just heard that the head of that country is now getting the Nobel Peace Prize for saving the country. I said, did I have something to do with it? Yeah.
Well, in response, Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed advised Mr. Trump on how to deal with his complaint.
To be honest, I don't have any clue about the criteria, how the Nobel Committee select an individual for the prize. So the issue of President Trump must go to the Nobel Prize Committee. I'm not aware how they elect or select someone to provide the prize. And I'm not working for the prize. I'm working that peace is a very critical thing for our region. And if they recognize, and if President Trump complained, it must go to Oslo, not to Ethiopia.
Well, I'm not quite sure if this qualifies as a presidential spat, but long may it continue. Now, don't forget, you can get in touch with me and some of the team. I'm on social media at Okwoche. But for now, from me, Peter Okwoche, and the rest of the Focus on Africa team, thanks for watching the program. Goodbye, and see you again very soon.